I could kiss them all day if she'd let me. Her laugh, she hates but I think it's so sexy. She's so beautiful, and I tell her every day. It's what you're searching for, then just stay the same. So don't even bother asking if you look okay. You know I'll say when I see your face, there's not a thing that I would change. 'Cause you're amazing, just the way you are. And when you smile, the whole world stops and stares for a while. 'Cause girl, you're amazing, just the way you are. The way you are. Girl, you're amazing, just the way you are. When I see your face, there's not a thing that I would change. 'Cause you're amazing, just the way you are. And when you smile, the whole world stops and stares for a while. 'Cause girl, you're amazing, just the way you are. You are my treasure, you are my treasure, you are my treasure. Yeah, you are my treasure, you are my treasure, you are my treasure. Yeah, turn your magic on. With me, she'd say everything you want to dream away. We are legends every day. That's what she told me. Turn your magic on. To me, she'd say everything you want to dream away. Under this pressure, under this weight, we are diamonds, and I feel my heart beating. I feel my heart underneath my skin. I feel my heart beating. You make me feel. like I'm alive again. Alive again. Oh, you make me feel like I'm alive again. Said I can't go on, not in this way. I'm a dreamer, died by light of day. Gonna hold up half the sky and say, only I own me. I feel my heart beating. I feel my heart. Like I'm
Hey.
I always see you busy. Surrounded by.
No.
Just wanted to drop it. Sorry, it's not in English, but I know it's yeah, perfect, yeah. Yeah, but I haven't
Hey. Hey, probando micro. Hey, probando micro. Hey, sí. Hey, checando micro. Sí, ok. Buenas tardes.
that we should, I can go and visit you and talk more about the details.
Yeah, it's, I just like the fact we believe very much. A lot of the evaluations we're doing on implementation, I should send you a couple of them. We just looked at 5 citizen security projects, and very much what does it take to implement those projects, and what's going on in those projects. And then the BRT, that's where the transit, we've done 3 of those, and what it's all about implementation, opening the projects. And that's what's useful to me. It's getting down to the details and what went wrong for operational stuff, which is our main audience for this kind of evaluation. That's what's useful. And it's reasonably, it's case studies, like you said. I really like it. No.
John
Flores. We're very independent, and we decided.
But we're missing Tanya.
And, yeah, and I'll talk
Tanya?
about that. It's kind of the World Bank model as well. But I'm glad you're focusing. I think there's room for everything. There's room for all different kinds of work, because it's all answers to different kinds of questions.
Gracias, Tanya. I think now we are complete, so we can, perdón, podemos seguir con la segunda parte de la mesa, y me da mucho gusto empezar presentando al maestro John Floretta, que es maestro en leyes y diplomacia por la Escuela Fletcher de la Universidad de Tufts. John Floretta es director asociado de política para JPAL. Ha trabajado con investigadores asociados de JPAL, al igual que con el mismo staff a nivel global y regional, para divulgar lecciones de evaluaciones aleatorias y promover decisiones informadas mediante evidencia y crecimiento de programas sociales exitosos. El maestro Floretta ha centrado su carrera en la gestión de programas de desarrollo internacional y el análisis. Ha trabajado con el Programa de Desarrollo de las Naciones Unidas y el Programa Alimentario Mundial de las Naciones Unidas en China durante 5 años. Adelante.
Buenos dias, everyone. I would like to thank CDE and CLEAR and the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present today. And it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, is thinking about how do evaluations translate for use, and use that with the ultimate aim of benefiting the lives of the poor through better policies. So one thing I want to say up front, because I'm coming from the Poverty Action Lab, I'm coming from JPAL. It's a center based at MIT at the economics department that focuses on one type of evaluation, which is randomized evaluations. Just so we're clear in terms of what at least our view on this is that, I do believe that randomized evaluations and impact in general is a very useful tool when we're interested in that OECD DAC criteria of evaluating a program for impact. However, I think that we've done a very bad job in the past of giving people the impression that we think that every program should be evaluated with a randomized control trial, or every program should be evaluated with an impact evaluation, and that's really not what we think. That some of the most interesting questions often are about questions of, if in India, where I worked for 4 years, is how many, as part of SGG4, how many kids in primary school can learn at a grade level, or reading at a grade level? And that question is not answered by an impact evaluation. The answer to that question, unfortunately, is that half of kids in grade 2, half of kids in grade 5 are at a grade 2 level. And then the broader interesting question about why this might be is also not something you answer through an impact evaluation. So I think that there's lots of, I just wanted to get that out there because I think some people do have the misconception that we focus, our comparative advantage is to focus on impact evaluation. And as you'll see later in the presentation, when thinking about the policy relevance of randomized evaluations, I think it's absolutely essential that randomized evaluations are coupled together with what we know from descriptive evidence and what we know about context. So I'm going to be sharing my experience as a practitioner in trying to get from evaluations to use. And I don't have any best practices to share with you. What I will share with you is our experience about thinking and trying things in this area over the last 7 years. And I'll try to go through the first half of the presentation quite quickly to give you background, and I'm going to focus on 3 emerging insights based on JPAL's work in India, in Africa, and here in Latin America. So there's been a proliferation of randomized evaluations over the last 5 or 10 years. So here this shows that there's been something like 738 random evaluations that have been done in 67 different countries. Now, the core of who's doing these evaluations is mostly professors, largely economists. And so we started off at the economics department at MIT, but now we have over 130 professors from over 40 universities that are affiliated with JPAL, including Enrique Ceres here at ITAM. And we're working across sectors, so in agriculture, crime, education, energy and environment, finance, health, labor, political economy, and governance. Now, one of the things I think there's 2 things I think that make JPAL a little bit unique. One is this, we're rooted in the academic work, and so I think one of our greatest assets is that we have some of the top development economists in the world who are working with policymakers to design and test innovations. I think one of the second things that makes JPAL unique, and maybe this is a little bit self-serving because I'm on this team, is the fact that we're thinking very intentionally about the link between evaluations and policy making, policy change, so this link towards use. So a signal of that is that over this last 7 years, we have 55 staff members, including myself, as well as, I have 2 colleagues here that are based in Mexico, that are focusing specifically on translating evidence to use. And these 55 staff members are in over 15 different countries. So our mission is to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by evidence. In fact, we'll never be able to fully ensure that, but by moving in that direction. And the reality is that, as been remarked yesterday and by speakers today, is that policy is in fact very difficult to change. Policy evidence is only going to be, realistically, one small part of a policymaker's overall decision. Institutions have constraints. On the supply side, evidence is often unavailable or inaccessible, and there's many other things that are happening in a policymaker's mind. So the question for us is, what helps to promote the use of evidence? Good evaluations, accessible evidence, receptive policymakers, lots of good outreach work, a bit of good luck. What are the types of things that are the ingredients to get from evidence to policy change? And there's a lot of literature on this as well. So the news is not all bad, and this number is also a number that I think should not be used to measure use specifically. It's a very general number. But when we look at JPAL studies in the last, say, just bring it down to the last 3 or 4 years, there's 10 that we have included on our website now. I'm in charge of writing. There's another additional 10 case studies of programs that have scaled up that I'm a little bit behind in writing up. But we do have, it's still an exceptional number, but we have programs that are being scaled up, in part connected to evidence from evaluations. Those programs have reached at scale over 200 million people so far. So it's not small, it's something that is beginning to happen more regularly. And yesterday we talked about how there are many different pathways to scale, and there's not just this linear model of connecting evidence to an improved policy at scale. Here I just thought I would include 3 pathways. We actually have mapped out internally around 8 or 9 different pathways. One is this more traditional approach of a government or a scale partner implementing a program at small scale, and then based on a successful pilot, scaling it up based on that. So one example for that is the Generosity program in Indonesia, which is a community block grant program that JPAL collaborated with the government of Indonesia. It enables communities to allocate funds to different social programs and services. And based on the evaluation, in part, that program reaches alone around 6 to 7 million people per year over the last 3 years. Another example is, and I'll speak more to this, is when we have evidence in one context, how can we responsibly translate that evidence in certain cases to other contexts? So an example has been, there's been a lot of rich work done in remedial education, following the kids, helping kids who have fallen behind catch up. There's been several evaluations in India, but also in Ghana, in Kenya. And this is a program where we've been working with policymakers in India and now in Zambia to take the program and contextualize it for a new environment. And I'll speak a little bit more about how we think about a framework where we think about when that can be done responsibly. And another example of when evidence can help us get at scale is when a good evaluation happens to answer a question that's on the tops of minds of many policymakers. And there's an example from the last few years where there was a debate about charging a price, user fees for preventative healthcare products. So for example, bed nets to prevent malaria. And you had a lot of good evaluations and a good research that showed that any type of price, even though highly subsidized, plummets usage. And if what you're actually trying to get at is is to improve coverage, that full subsidies would help you get much more toward that goal, and that people weren't less likely in the future to purchase a bed net if they got one fully subsidized at the current moment. So these are just different ways I'm trying to say of how good evaluations have scaled up, and there's pathways to scale. Now, I don't have time to get much into this, but we know that these are still exceptional stories, right? I showed you a map of around 700 evaluations that are ongoing or completed. I think we have good examples for about 30 or 40 instances where evaluations have been scaled up. But so let's just touch really briefly on what are some of the constraints. There are the supply side constraints coming from the evaluation community, from ourselves. Varying quality of evaluations. Evaluations are often not summarized or synthesized, as pointed out by policymakers here. Evaluations also sometimes don't capture the cost of the interventions very well. I think the big one where we could do more as the evaluation community, and I'll actually also speak for JPAL, we can do more for JPAL, is actually on the demand side. And is that there are demand side constraints for policymakers to use evaluations. One of them, which I think has been rightly pointed out and by the panel, has been time. So policymakers often don't have a lot of time to review evidence, to review evaluations, even systematic reviews. So I think there's a lot of promise about how can we as evaluators and as researchers engage with policymakers in a way that's sensitive to their limited time. So let me just zip through some of the things that we've been doing. So here's how I want you to think about this, is that I've told you that we set up a policy team 7 years ago, and we have a few staff in different countries. What I'm going to try to cover in the next 5 minutes is just some of the obvious places that you would start, that we have started to try to get us closer to use. And where I want to end up is with these 3 emerging lessons, which I think are a little bit more informative. So on the supply side, one of the things that we've been trying to do is channel evaluations to under-researched areas. So JPAL hosts these large initiatives. So for example, I'll just pick up the case of agricultural technology adaptation. DFID and Gates and a few other donors have put in money to answer questions about when good agricultural technology products, such as improved seeds, loans, insurance, why aren't they being adopted in real life? And so trying to channel more research to these unanswered questions to improve the supply that can help guide future policymakers. Again, I won't have time to go through this in a lot of detail. One of the things that we're thinking about when we report evaluations is not to try to only report the magnitude of change, so the impact estimate of a program, but also to do that as a ratio to cost. So it involves good cost collection in the evaluations. And sometimes you can find some interesting things about this. So here, we're going to consider anything above like 0.2 standard deviations in education to actually be quite large. This is actually how many additional standard deviations do you get for an investment of $100 for particular programs. And I think the main point here of the slide is that we found in a variety of contexts, Kenya, India, the Philippines, that interventions that are focusing on pedagogy and in particular remedial education have had very large returns. Whereas, at least in a couple of cases, one in Colombia, one in Peru, that investing in technology alone or inputs alone without accompanying investments in teacher training or in pedagogy or in curriculum or incentives, they have had less impact, and particularly when considered as a function of cost, because the cost of technology is so high. Now, this does not mean that we should put all of our money and invest in pedagogy and not invest in education technology, but it does mean that if we're looking and scanning how programs can be designed better, a good starting point would be to try to figure out why these programs in these two contexts have been less successful. And then we're doing the other obvious things that you would do in terms of trying to make the evaluations more accessible. So we have an evaluation database on our website, which you can look by sector, by region, by policy issue, and find a 2-page evaluation summary. And then we also have publications that we put out to share particularly pertinent lessons. So this is where I think any of us would start if you had a team and you were trying to get that team focused on doing, communicating what we've learned about from evidence. I'll say that a part of this is also working on the demand side, and we have done trainings similar to the CLEAR's work here in Latin America, and we've been focusing on sharing evidence-informed insights with policymakers, and we've actually found that some of these closed-door meetings with policymakers have been more effective than these larger conferences. Okay, so let me try to get to our first emerging insight. These are kind of the things that we did over the first 5 years, and the few insights I can share are the direction that where we want to be going more towards now. So one is building institutional partnerships with governments. And what I mean by an institutional partnership is essentially doing more than one evaluation with a partner at a time. What we found is that's not a very good way of building a culture towards evaluation. So what we're really looking at is trying to build multifaceted, longer-term engagements, often with a capacity building. So this could be, imagine it could be with a state, it could be with a central government ministry, it could be with a municipality, it could be with particular departments. Co-designing the program and the evaluation based on the policymaker's priorities. An emphasis here on they have the opportunity to collaborate with top researchers to design and test innovations. And that's kind of how we set it up with the policymakers. And looking at timelines which serve both the policymakers and academic priorities, and a systematic process of reviewing evidence and linking to decisions. So I'll have to skip to one example we have done this is with the Ministry of Education in Peru. And we have, what the program looks like here is the Ministry of Education in Peru was interested in collaborating with researchers from JPAL. So Francisco Gallego is one researcher who's in this partnership. Sebastian Galliani is another. But what they were very clear about what their priorities were. First, they only wanted to test cost-effective programs. So they weren't interested in testing new programs as much as they were looking at how we could improve some of their current programs. That was a big priority for them because they had limited budget. Second was the idea that they didn't want to spend a lot of money on evaluation. So they asked us to focus on programs that we could link to administrative data that they're already collecting, so we didn't have to collect a lot of additional data. And 3 was time. So they wanted the results to be available a program that we're doing this year to influence next year's policy priorities. So we've set up programs with them that have been looking at the delivery of information on the returns of concluding secondary education, programs looking at the delivery of comparative information on school performance. So these are just examples where we're trying to integrate evaluation into the context of a policymaker and have the evaluations answer the questions that they would like, and also create a space where there's more meaningful collaboration between the researchers or evaluators and the policymakers. This is something that we're beginning to explore in Latin America. In the US, we've worked with the White House Social Behavioral Sciences team. We worked with the government of Tamil Nadu in India, a state in India. And we are exploring partnerships. We have one ongoing with the Ministry of Economy, with Seminario in Colombia. And then we're exploring partnerships, similar partnerships where we would embed a research team to government departments with a variety of other partners here in the region. Now, the second emerging insight I want to get at is responding to thinking about how policies can be, how evidence from one context can be responsibly generalized into another context. And I think that this is just the honest answer is that the reason we're interested in doing this is that, yes, we will have a handful of institutional partnerships, but they'll have many partnerships, many evaluations that are done outside these institutional partnerships. And a good evaluation is a very difficult and hard thing to do. So how can that evidence that's generated, and what conditions that evidence that's generated not only apply to that program at that context and that time, but also potentially be used as one piece of information and generalized more for broader knowledge about what types of programs work. And here, part one of the insights is that questions that are evaluating a specific program, but answer a more general question about human behavior. So a question connected to, overcoming, many people will underinvest in preventative healthcare products, many times due to things that are common traits across cultures, like from time inconsistent preferences. We can find evidence that a small incentive or sometimes additional information is enough to nudge behavior change. So I'll just try to wrap up in the next 2 minutes. Is that okay? Okay, I'll be very quick. So here, I think one of the big, more interesting studies that we've done at JPAL has been a study that looked at increasing immunization rates through a small incentive in India. And the question I want to ask is, when could that program be responsibly generalized with good process evaluation to another context? And what I'll try to get at is that one of the key questions is wrestling with what parts of the context are important to match up so the example I'm going to use is Sierra Leone. So when could you take evidence from India and a program that was done with an NGO and take it to the government in Sierra Leone 10 years later? And I don't have time to get into all of the details, but what I'm going to try to get at is that the reason that a small incentive program in India was very effective at increasing overall immunization coverage was that here there was a problem of persistence. And so we can look at the control group to start, that 50% of families had immunized their children with one vaccine. But what you find is that to be fully immunized, you need 5 vaccines, 5 antigens, and the result was just 6%. So when we were thinking, and this is kind of rooted in broader theory, that people will tend to procrastinate when there's a cost today and kind of a less certain benefit in the future. And an incentive, not only in this program, but in other programs that we've done in West Africa, has been effective at encouraging people to nudging people to making these investments when they're also face persistence problems. So the question that we are interested in actually asking is, what is the theory of change about why this program worked in India? And are the local conditions, general behaviors, and local implementation similar in Sierra Leone? And what I can show you, and Sierra Leone is country number 1, is that you see a similar problem with persistence. So I don't have time to get into all of the details, but I think what we've done in this instance have mapped out the theory of change, have mapped out the parts of the program that we think are based on general behaviors, and made a case that this program can indeed be, that the relevant context in Sierra Leone is consistent enough with this context in India, not to recommend for scale-up, but to recommend that this might be a program that the government of Sierra Leone could try, pilot it first. We're helping them with a process evaluation, not an impact evaluation. And this is the general way that we're trying to get at translating evidence from one context to another. And we don't do this by ourselves. So we do it with other partners, both to provide the funding, but also partners who know something about how do you take evidence of something that works and translate that evidence into a model that can be scaled in a country, and couple that with good monitoring on the ground. So that's our second, our third key insight is that if you're able to find examples of when evidence can generalize responsibly, that you can't just present that to the government and walk away. You need to, by yourself or together with a coalition, be providing support so they can adapt it to their context, so they can design a model that could be scaled efficiently, and that we're doing good monitoring to see that the program that they are implementing is consistent with the general knowledge. So thank you. I apologize I went over on time, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have a final presentation perdón. Tenemos una presentación final por la doctora Cheryl Gray, que es doctora en Políticas Públicas por la Universidad de Harvard y licenciada en Economía por la Universidad de Stanford. Ha publicado numerosos trabajos sobre reforma legal, gobierno y reestructuración de empresas en las economías en transición. Se incorporó al BID en junio del 2011, después de trabajar 25 años en el Banco Mundial, más recientemente como directora del Grupo de Evaluación Independiente. Previo a asumir ese cargo, Cheryl se desempeñó como directora en la Vicepresidencia para Europa y Asia Central, administrando el trabajo del Banco Mundial en asuntos de políticas económicas, gobernanza, reformas legales y judiciales y en análisis de género y pobreza en 30 países de la zona. Gracias, Cheryl.
Muchas gracias. Creo que yo también voy a presentar en inglés, porque para mí y también para ustedes sería mejor. Pero la presentación es en español. So I'm very happy to be here. One thing that was not on my bio is I have been working and supporting CLEAR since it was formed, and was actually, I have to brag a little bit, chairperson of the board when we chose CLEAR as our center. And that has worked out so beautifully, and it's such a pleasure to be here and see all the wonderful things that have been done, and also working with John in the South Asia CLEAR Center for a while. So I guess it's appropriate that I come last. I also have an interesting fact that much of what I'm going to say we've heard, so I actually think I'm summarizing the seminar for you all, because even though I put this together before I came, so many of the themes keep repeating themselves. So a lot of what I'll say I'll do quickly, and I think it will be somewhat of a summary. But I will tell you a bit about the Inter-American Development Bank and how evaluation works in that environment. Is there a? Yes. Oh, I think I'll need that. Yes, thank you. So, which one do you do?
Here to
Aquí, okay, bien, gracias. Oh, is it on top? Oh, maybe you have to turn it around, that would help. Aquí, bien, 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 okay. So there was an interesting summary done. I suspect that our UN colleague knows this because it was Evaldev, the partners, Eval Partners that did this one, I'm not exactly sure. But it was a review of evaluation practices throughout the development community. And I got a draft a month or two ago, and it was very interesting reading. It identified 1,200 evaluations done per year at a cost of about $177 million. These are all in the bilateral and multilateral development agencies. Produced or supervised by 627 employees. And of course, the big question is, do these have impact? Couldn't resist the picture. So, in thinking about that, I mean, is the glass half empty? Is the glass half full? I liked some of the presentations yesterday that were asking some tough questions. I think it's, it's easy for us evaluators to think that things are going great and we're doing great work and we're adding to the world. But I also think most of us realize there are huge issues, and that's why I appreciate this seminar on use. I've actually learned a lot of ideas, but I think it is a huge issue of how much of all of this work we actually use. So I was thinking about the conceptual framework that I would think, and of course, great minds must think alike, because it was exactly the same one that John just presented, which is really thinking on demand and supply. I guess coming from an economic background, you can't resist. And so talking about supply to begin with, and I'll just go through this quickly because a lot of the things have been said over the last 2 days. But when you think, what do you really need to have evaluations be used? These were the things that I had come up with. The first is an institutional setup for evaluation, where you have resources. Obviously, we all need resources. You have some sense of independence. It's not going to be a useful evaluation if you don't have the independence to say what you find, to be honest. You have access to information. Easier said than done. Often there's no information there to do an evaluation. You have quality. All of these things are very difficult. It's, again, what John said, doing a good evaluation is difficult. We take it for granted, but it's very hard. How do you get quality? You've got to have good staff, well-trained staff, and you've got to train them in lots of different approaches. They have to know not only the methodology, but they have to be able to communicate. They have to have good judgment. They have to know the sector or the country in which they're working. It's hard to be a good evaluator. And you have to have incentives for evaluators. And I think this is a huge issue. Many evaluators, face a conflict of interest. They're evaluating for someone that they'd like to have a job with, or they're trying to get another, they're a consulting firm trying to just get more jobs. I see many evaluations that, frankly, our management and the World Bank's management hires basically are being hired to tell management what they want to hear. They're really not independent. So I think the incentives of evaluators is a huge, huge issue. Then the tone of what you do. We try so hard, and I'll get to this as I talk about IDB, to have a tone that people will hear and people will listen to. Accurate has to be honest, but also constructive. Nothing will turn off someone as a destructive, angry evaluation. And probably engaging the evaluee as well. Several people over the last 2 days have talked about that, but not too much. I mean, I'm pretty traditional in that you have to do your evaluation with some sense of an independent space. You're not doing it together with the evaluee. But you have to engage them, and they have to be heard, and you have to get feedback. Timeliness, here it says coordinación, but timeliness is very important. If you do an evaluation too late, it's not going to be very useful. Also a big issue, especially for evaluations that take a long time. And you have to make efforts to disseminate and get the word out. If no one knows about your evaluation, you're not going to have much use. So again, it sounds obvious. Many people have said this, but these things are really difficult. Each one of them is a real challenge. Then on the demand side, which I think, frankly, is even more of a challenge, and I think John pointed this out as well. Your counterpart, whoever you're evaluating, needs to have the capacity to be able to implement your recommendations, the knowledge and understanding, and also the resources. More important, and this is something I stress a lot as I think about it, and we'll get to that in the multilateral development bank context, is the governance situation of wherever you're doing the evaluation. The incentives of those in power to take steps to improve. Everybody implicitly adopts the model of, well, policymakers want to do the right thing, and you just tell them what it is, and they'll try. I think the world's much more complex than that, and we systematically underemphasize this problem, that politics is a very difficult game with winners and losers, and people are always trying to get on the upper hand. And this is politics within an organization, politics within a government, within a project team. It's easy if you give them good news. It's easy if you give them news on something that's negative that they also think is negative and want to change. It's very hard if you give any kind of negative news to someone who's not ready to hear it or is threatened by it. So the whole governance environment, how do you get civil servants or heads of companies to want to do the right thing? I mean, this is the whole question of the governance environment. And I think it's absolutely essential, beyond probably the power of evaluators to change, but an essential component of use of evaluation that I think we tend to underemphasize. So turning to IDB. Our mission, and it's a little different than what you've heard from other people, in that our evaluation office and our mission is to help IDB be a better organization in supporting Latin America. It's about the development effectiveness of all the support IDB provides. I did work in my most recent job at the World Bank was in the evaluation office there, and I think it's very, very similar. So it's not directly with the governments, and it's not directly with, inside a government. We're really working on this large organization to get it to operate, which is a little different evaluation role, and I'll get to that. But I think the same concepts still apply. On the supply side, I'll just describe our situation along all of these dimensions that I've noted. First, on the institutional setup. Actually, I think the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, all of them, our bank, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the African, the EBRD, have a similar setup, and it's really quite a unique setup in that we have an architecture that has a very independent office within an organization. That's kind of rare. If you have independent offices, they tend to be outside of the organization. And most offices within an organization are not very independent. Ours is an independent office. Really, it is quite independent. Most people doubt that, but I can tell you it is, and I'll get to that in a minute, within this organization. So we have two levels of evaluation. Within the projects themselves that the operational management does, there's this development effectiveness framework in IDB, which lays out very clearly that you have to have an evaluability assessment at the beginning of a project, you have to monitor the project, you have to report on the project at the end, and you have to have an evaluation system put in to evaluate the project. We do not do that. This is done by the operational staff. We then come along and validate that. We look at the quality of what they've done, and we do our own independent evaluations of some of those projects or of other programs. So it's a two-stage architecture, with one being management itself and the other being our independent office. And we are a very independent office relative to what I think most organizations would have. I report to the board of directors. I can only be hired by the board of directors or fired by the board of directors for certain cause. With a fixed term, I can never work for the organization in any capacity after this job. I have full authority to hire my staff. I've given the budget completely separate from management. And there's other aspects. We publish what we do. We have a very clear rules of how we interact with management. But we're really very independent. And we also follow basic rules of budgeting and travel rules and other things for accountability of our office. But they've set it up that within the terms of my tenure, I really have a lot of freedom to do the job. And this is true of the other MDBs as well. We have complete access to information. We cannot be denied access to pretty much any kind of information, people. And this is very much respected. Talking to people in the field, getting access to old data. If we're asked, 99% of the time, immediately we get the information. And all of the staff throughout the whole organization know this and respect this. So it works quite well in terms of the institutional setup. We do have sufficient resources to do our work. You can always do more, but I feel that it's a very reasonable, and it's a similar percentage of the overall administrative budget across the various multilateral development banks. About 1.3% of the administrative budget is allocated to independent evaluation. We disclose all of our evaluations. There is some potential exception, but it's never been called. We also have a management response for every evaluation, which is disclosed together with ours. We have a tracking system that for 3 years after the evaluation is completed, we track what's actually happened with the recommendations. If the board supports the recommendations, it's then tracked for 3 years, what does management do? So they've tried in every way they can to set up an institutional setup that works with integrity around the evaluation system. The quality, I think our quality is good, and largely because we're drawing from a very, very good pool of expert Latin American, mostly economists, but some other professions as well, who value and have learned very, very good techniques. And it's a nice place to work. We get a lot of applicants for our jobs, and I think we have a very good team of evaluators. We work very hard on the tone, very hard to be honest but constructive. And so I always say we have to be honest, but we really need to be constructive. And I think if you read our evaluations, you will find, I hope, that tone. And frankly, given when we deal with management, they will often tell us, can you please reword that? And also with countries. We do evaluate a lot of projects and programs in countries, and the country always gives us feedback. And often it's, that word is sensitive to us. Could you change it? So we're working on tone a lot. We also do short versions of our material, summaries, newsletters. Everything is done in Spanish and English, and if it deals with Portuguese, with Brazil or Haiti, we also translate into the third language. We integrate the time. We're very careful on the timeliness, and in IDB especially, actually much better, I think, than the World Bank, because it's smaller and it's manageable. Our evaluations are very much integrated into the critical path of decisions of management. Every strategy for a country has to be preceded by an evaluation we do of that program under the last strategy in the country. Every sector framework document for a sector, we try to do evaluations that feed into that. We do a lot of corporate evaluations around how IDB works as management. And these are often around major initiatives. I could give you a lot of examples, but I won't take the time right now. But we do a lot of different kinds of evaluations, but we very much try to time them. And I think generally we do a pretty good job. It's not always perfect, but we care a lot about the timing. And finally, dissemination, we're getting better at that. It's hard. Evaluators don't like to do that. They like to do the evaluations and write it. Then they like to go on to the next analytic piece. But we really try hard, and we're doing a lot better at having workshops and getting together with governments and putting all of our stuff in nice materials and just using the web more and trying to get more outreach. And I think all of these things are helping on the supply side. On the demand side in IDB, there's really pretty strong capacity in IDB, and I never think it's an issue of the people we're evaluating, the management, not having the capacity to do things. Sometimes in the countries, we have to be very careful that we're not making recommendations that are unreasonable, given the capacity and the resources. But certainly the governance environment, I think, is the big issue. Not only in IDB, I think in all of the development communities, probably in every organization on earth, it doesn't operate perfectly. But we do have in multilateral development banks boards of directors that come from the countries. They have complex incentives. Not always completely focused on results. It's always part of it, but not always all of it. Management in all of these MDBs, and I think all the bilaterals as well. Management and staff get rewarded for making loans and for getting money out the door. It's hard to focus on results. It's a lot easier to measure how much money was dispersed. External accountability used to be very high. There used to be many NGOs commenting on, the World Bank. I remember in the 1990s, 50 years is enough. It's kind of disappeared from the scene. There's not nearly as much external scrutiny of the development community, and my impression is, than there used to be. Competitive pressures are interesting because there's more and more pressures in Latin America for demand. A lot of countries are now able to access capital markets and can borrow cheaply on capital markets. There are other lenders out there who are offering better terms than IDB. So there's a lot of competition for clients, which is a good thing because it forces you to be efficient, to get your lending rates down. To be efficient, you need to find out how to do things effectively and efficiently. So there's a bit of a push for doing things better, and evaluation feeds right into that. So I think the glass is half full. It's not terrible, but definitely it's not ideal. And this, to me, constrains use of our evaluations more than anything else, is the incentives in the governance framework are just not there always. Depends on the evaluation, depends on the client base, who we're talking about, what topic we're doing. Some are much more sensitive than others. But I do think that's a big issue that often is overlooked. I think other institutions of development face similar issues, the multilaterals. I know them all really well. We have a group that works across all the multinationals. We meet all the time. They all face similar weaknesses on the governance front. Bilaterals, I think most development parts of governments, development agencies and governments, have a difficult time speaking truth when it's about a failure of their government. Governments don't really like to hear about failure. One example we had to do an evaluation of a trust fund given by one of the OECD countries to IDB. We were asked to do an evaluation. I think it's the hardest evaluation I have ever done. There was so much resistance on the part of the government for us to say anything negative about this trust fund. I was just shocked. Really much worse than most of the Latin American countries we deal with. So every country, no government is immune to not wanting to have bad news, published on the internet about their policies. I think the governments as well. There's a lot of political concerns, and there's human capital constraints. So the results, we have a lot of evaluations, many of good quality throughout the development community. I think they're not used nearly as much as they could be. And there are real challenges. Glass is half full, but it's not all the way full. And I think it's somewhat risky. We spend a lot of money, and there's a lot of support, but I think it's not inevitable that there's going to continue to be a lot of support in the development community. In fact, I even feel in the multilateral development banks a lot of questioning around the amount of money spent on evaluation as things get tighter and as resources get tighter. So we are going to have to prove that we're adding value and we're useful. And I don't think it's an absolute sure thing. So just to close, I'll do this real quickly. Based on the things we've said, what are some thoughts on how you can increase the use of evaluations? It's along the same lines, the basic things on supply, which are very difficult to do, but are absolutely essential, of having the resources, some sense of independence, access to information, a good tone to what you're doing, good staffing and training, good timing, and efforts at outreach. Each one of those is a task, and I think each one of those needs attention. They're essential and necessary, but not sufficient conditions for use. On the demand side, I'm not sure how you work on that. It's really tough. But economics would have you say, we need more external scrutiny. Economics and political science and governance, we need more external scrutiny. I'm not sure how to get that in the development community, but it helps to have NGOs looking over your shoulder and asking questions and reading your evaluations and asking management. It helps to have the media reading evaluations. GAO was mentioned yesterday. GAO, I read articles regularly in the Washington Post about findings of the GAO, and that's very valuable. So we need external scrutiny for all of us. And that will help the demand and the use. Transparency goes along with that. We need to be able to disclose everything we do and make it available. I think competition between the various MDBs and political competition in a government are also essential, or helpful at least. I think somebody said yesterday that authoritarian governments rarely allow independent evaluation. And so I think that's essential. I don't have any answers for that. But I think thinking about the governance environment and how we move forward beyond the scope of evaluators, of course, but it's essential for how we're going to make evaluations be used. So that's all. This is our website. Everything's disclosed, and I look forward to your questions.
Muchas gracias, Cheryl. Bueno, tuvimos dos excelentes presentaciones que de hecho creo que las dos contribuyen a un poco sintetizar muchos de los temas que se han discutido estos 2 días. En el caso de JPAL me gustaría enfatizar las lecciones o los insights que creo que son particularmente interesantes, porque JPAL es un muy buen ejemplo, hay pocos otros de hecho, de digamos, una compilación gigantesca de evaluaciones, como vimos en la primera gráfica, a través de todo el mundo, algunas muy pequeñas, algunas más grandes, todas en contextos muy distintos, donde, digamos, sacarle jugo más general a esto, para más allá de cada una evaluación en particular, para que, por ejemplo, un gobierno que quiere atacar la asistencia escolar pueda saber cuál es la mejor manera de hacerlo, es todo un reto, ¿no? No es algo que puedas tú sacar inmediatamente sin resolver algunos problemas. Entonces, me gustó mucho la idea de pues participaciones más cercanas con los gobiernos que están tratando de implementar políticas específicas, es decir, ayudarle a los gobiernos a interpretar la evidencia, si entendí bien. El tema de generalizar la evidencia es muy importante en diferentes contextos, y esta idea de enfocarse más a digamos, comportamientos generales en vez del contexto específico, y nos lleva a pensar en una estrategia de investigación un poco distinta, ¿no? Porque ahorita como que cuando hacemos evaluaciones de impacto o random control trials, estamos pensando en programas, no estamos pensando en aprender sobre el comportamiento humano, ¿no? Tal vez sería, esto me llevó a pensar pues, que tal vez una estrategia más eficiente para programas, para diseñar programas generalizables, sea pensar en una investigación más científica típica, que es tratar de entender cómo funciona las políticas públicas con incentivos humanos en un contexto general, ¿no? Y finalmente el tema de enfatizar lo que significa el contexto, los distintos contextos, ¿no? La presentación de Cheryl creo que, como dijo ella, resume excelentemente bien y con mucha claridad muchos de los temas que se han visto, la importancia del entorno institucional, la independencia en particular, la calidad, el tono, que es algo que creo que no habíamos visto tanto, que es bien importante, la idea de que un tono sea constructivo y por lo tanto las evaluaciones no se rechacen, la temporalidad, la oportunidad de la información y la diseminación. Y es interesante ver cómo en instituciones multilaterales, en el BIT, y por lo que entiendo es bastante similar en las otras, estas cosas operan de una manera muy interesante. Un tema que no vi acá, que creo que es interesante, nada más que quisiera dejar a veces, el conflicto que hay, mucho de la investigación pues es académica, y el conflicto entre los incentivos académicos o científicos, si queremos ser más, y por un lado, y los incentivos de los que quieren implementar políticas para resolver problemas, por el otro. Son incentivos no nada más muy distintos, sino muchas veces opuestos. Y creo que ese es un tema que es necesario ¿no? comentar en algún momento. Bueno, tenemos desafortunadamente muy poco tiempo, porque parecía que teníamos mucho más tiempo, pero se nos fue acabando. Entonces voy a tomar unas 3 preguntas, les voy a preguntar que sean muy concisos, muy breves, muy directos. Pues ya tenemos 3 manos acá.
Gracias, trataré de ser conciso, pero se han acumulado las inquietudes. Primero, no entiendo, y ese sería el planteamiento, por qué hay tantos organismos de evaluación. En una organización debe haber un organismo de evaluación, si no, Petróleos estaría atascado de organismos de evaluación o de departamentos. Ejemplo, el Coneval, el Instituto de Evaluación Educativa, la Unidad de Evaluación del Desempeño de la Secretaría de Hacienda, las auditorías al desempeño de la función pública y todos los OICs, órganos internos de control. El segundo, no entiendo, y ese es mi planteamiento, ¿por qué se hacen evaluaciones parciales? Creo que es el caso específico del Coneval, que hace evaluaciones de impacto, y me da la impresión o me recuerda que antes se mencionaba mucho que se quería una obra terminada para tal fecha, cueste lo que cueste o acomode lugar. Entonces, cuando se evalúan los impactos, pues no se está evaluando el costo. Sí, y cuando se evalúa el diseño no se evalúa la operación, entonces se evalúa la planeación, no la ejecución y el resultado, lo cual solamente es válido en el caso de programas nuevos, creo yo, pero no lo entiendo. En el caso de la evaluación de programas no se ve si son suficientes y necesarios para el logro de las políticas. Y yo creo que debía ser importantísimo, porque se habla mucho de política, se habla mucho de evaluación y nadie las evalúa, mucho menos los ejes rectores y mucho menos los indicadores que ya los he visto, pero que dan pena de cómo se elaboran, la verdad. Y la evaluación de institutos, ¿cuánto cuesta el Instituto Nacional Electoral? Sí, comparativamente con otros países, y qué beneficios da. ¿Cuánto cuesta el INEGI? Que por cierto, no entiendo por qué la medición de las estadísticas públicas se hacen por el INEGI, excepto la medición de la pobreza que se hace a través de Coneval, y que creo que se están peleando por quién hace el determinado trabajo, no importan sus atribuciones. Y por último, la evaluación de las evaluaciones, cuánto cuesta cada evaluación y qué impacto tiene o qué cambios tiene en la sociedad. Ejemplo, todo lo que se gasta en programas sociales, y debería de compararse contra cuántos pobres dejaron de ser pobres y cuánto ha costado en los últimos 10 años, o el caso del Instituto Indigenista, cuánto se ha gastado en los últimos 10 o 20 años y cómo está la situación de los indígenas comparativamente con hace 20 años. Yo creo que están cada vez peor. Sí, ejemplo nada más sería de una autoevaluación lo que comentan el Coneval y el caso del OVE, que faltaría pues cuantificar, validar, sí, hablar de cobertura y hablar de satisfacción de clientes. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Reitero la petición de ser breves, por favor, en las siguientes dos.
Bueno, María Elena Mesta, delegada sustentable. Me gustó el tema al cual nos convocaron en esta sesión, ¿verdad? De para qué las evaluaciones. Me parece fundamental el para qué, para dejar atrás el por qué, la metodología, etcétera. A mí me parece que el tema habría que centrarse en la incidencia, en la calidad de vida de los beneficiarios en términos de un desarrollo integral, sustentable y competitivo, como lo marca nuestro Plan Nacional de Desarrollo. Y en este sentido, mi pregunta a ustedes sería: ¿cómo incidir? No por la vía voluntaria. Me parece que también el otro tema central en el cual nos ubicamos ya después de 10 años, como mencionaron ustedes, pues tendría que ser en cómo integrar un sistema de evaluación que se integre al Sistema Nacional de Planeación Democrática. Este sistema de evaluación tendría entonces que tener una base sobre un sistema de información, INEGI, que hoy por día está totalmente desvinculado. 2, un marco legal apropiado, es decir, el cual a mí ojalá que la próxima, que comentaran un poquito más sobre ese marco de evaluación, para que realmente la evaluación independientemente de que tenga un tono apropiado, sí sea vinculatorio y sí nos lleve a incentivos que se vean reflejados en un aumento o una disminución de presupuestos, pero también en todas estas medidas que ustedes acaban de mencionar, de reorientar, de generar nuevas actividades, de innovar, etcétera, y en un marco de planeación y gestión basado en resultados y no en matrices de marco lógico que se guardan en los escritorios de los funcionarios.
Gracias. Y
Aquí, por favor. Mi nombre es Miriam Cardoso, de la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana. Voy a partir de una síntesis que hizo la doctora Gray, donde decía que se hacían muchas evaluaciones, que algunas eran buenas y que la utilización era inferior al óptimo. Y después de todo lo que hemos estado conversando en estos días, ayer y hoy, pues a mí sí me gustaría un poco cerrar pensando en la situación de México y en la tendencia que yo visualizo en la realización de evaluaciones. Cuando la doctora Gray dice que se hacen muchas evaluaciones y nos habla de que las agencias de desarrollo hacen 1.200 al año, yo me pregunto si eso no es una buena referencia para darnos cuenta que en Coneval estamos haciendo demasiadas evaluaciones. No podemos pretender hacer 200 y tantas evaluaciones cuando todas las agencias hacen 1.200. ¿Cuál es el problema de eso? Pues todos queremos que la evaluación avance, pero que no avance solo en cantidad de programas. Queremos que avance en profundidad, queremos que avance en calidad, en posibilidades de utilización de esa información. Y bueno, yo me voy a referir nada más a dos casos extremos, yo diría, en el contexto del Coneval. Uno son las evaluaciones específicas de desempeño que Tania de la Garza nos hizo el favor de presentar y que yo llamaría el extremo de simplificación y estandarización de lo que son los procesos de evaluación. Una evaluación que en realidad no lo es un seguimiento, como se decía hoy acá en la mañana, es un monitoreo de un conjunto de indicadores, pero a eso no le podemos llamar una evaluación, porque no va más allá de eso y no tiene ninguna posibilidad de contrastar esa información contra lo que opinen otros actores vinculados al programa, contra lo que podría verse si hubiera un trabajo de campo que nos permitiera levantar información. Entonces, para mí ese es el extremo de la simplificación y es la inmensa mayoría de las evaluaciones que hace Coneval. En el extremo opuesto pondría las evaluaciones de impacto. Esas son las que más nos interesan porque son las que de veras miden cuáles son los resultados que estamos obteniendo en términos de efectos sobre la población que queremos impactar. ¿Y qué es lo que pasa? En los últimos años prácticamente Coneval ya no hace evaluaciones de impacto. ¿Y por qué no las hace? Entre otras cosas, porque ha identificado la evaluación de impacto con la experimentación, que como Tania decía hoy en la mañana, no ha demostrado ser el mejor método. Entonces, yo me pregunto, ¿por qué no ir más hacia profundizar en las evaluaciones en vez de querer abarcar tanto? Uno se entrevista con los operadores de los programas y los operadores dicen, pues lo que me entregan no sirve, no me sirve porque es la misma información que yo les di, no agrega nada. Entonces, si yo quiero tener realmente, resolver un problema, tengo que pedir una evaluación complementaria por mi cuenta. En eso hemos caído. Bueno, mi pregunta es entonces, si estamos de acuerdo en que estamos avanzando en términos de cantidad y no de calidad, con el enorme riesgo de que se detrimente la calidad, y si no deberíamos pensar en evaluaciones de impacto no experimentales que manejen información cuanti y cualitativa, y que nos permitan no solo medir el impacto, sino también explicarlo y aprender de cada una de esas experiencias. Bueno, pues muchas gracias.
muchas gracias. Preguntas complicadas, muchas para Coneval, pero no sé si quieren responder los panelistas.
Let me just say, I'll just say a couple of things. I really like the idea of evaluating the evaluations. And we are actually this year going to do an evaluation in my office of all the work that IDB has done on impact evaluations. We're going to do the costs, we're going to look at the time it took, we're going to look at how many were finished, we're going to look at what their use was to the extent we can. And it's It's going to be an interesting exercise because they've put a lot of emphasis, following Santiago Levy, who of course is started here with Progressa, put a lot of emphasis on impact evaluation. That I think they're proving to be very, very expensive. The other development agencies, including the United States Millennium Challenge Corporation, has gotten very much bogged down by mandating too many impact evaluations. The World Bank as well, and they are very much trying to focus their work a lot more. And they did this kind of evaluation of impact evaluations a couple of years ago. So I think it's a great idea. We need to scrutinize the field we're in as well and look for the benefit cost of all this work and how we can improve it. So I wanted to support that idea. Thank you for that. The other thing is, I think we really have to be careful about mandating evaluations in every case, because that just becomes a routine. You check the box, and it just becomes a waste of time. So you really, there's no way around judgment and having an independent institutional setup that provides the right incentives and then leaving judgment to Carnival on what's the best thing to do. There's no recipe. For us, we choose all of the evaluations we do, and there's no recipe. It's judgment based on what you know, and very complex judgment. So you just cannot mandate a rule, you're going to always do it here, always do it there, or always do this kind, or not, never do this kind. It just, in my experience, it just doesn't work. So.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of thoughts to that. I mean, I think that from a question that came up from the gentleman in the front about the value of different types of evaluations, and I think it connects with the point that Cheryl made just now, is that I'll speak from the perspective of someone who works for an organization focusing on randomized evaluations, is we have to be moved in a direction where we're being much more purposeful about the types of questions we're seeking to answer from a randomized evaluation, how it fits together with the broader literature. And also thinking about cost and timeliness. So I'll give a couple of examples. I mean, I thought that Susan Meyer, for those of you who were here yesterday, made a great point. She was covering some of the work that she'd done and some of the impact evaluations that she's done in Chicago. And one of the lessons I took away from it, and I think she did as well, that was one of her main points, is that we shouldn't allow impact evaluation to let us be lazy, that we're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money testing lots of random things which may or may not work. So one of the things that we've done, I didn't get a chance to cover it, was a partnership that we've set up with the Indian government of Tamil Nadu. It's a state of 70 million people. Now, if you looked at my slide, it said that we've done 15 evaluations with 13 affiliated professors in 5 different line departments. What it doesn't say on the slide is that of those 15 evaluations, I think around 7 or 8 of them are not randomized evaluations. The intention is to get to a promising, cost-effective, scalable intervention which we can rigorously evaluate. But half of those evaluations are precursors, much cheaper precursors to a randomized evaluation. So they're pilots, under $50,000. You're looking at, do I understand the context and the need for this program, number one, or before I spend a lot of money testing this promising innovation, do I have any confidence that this innovation can actually be implemented in this context? The impact question is what happens if it is. But the first question is just to actually go out and try. A second point I'd like to make is that I think this is this tension, but also the room for wonderful partnerships when you bring researchers and evaluators together with policymakers. So when we're looking at some of the partnerships that we've set up with EduLab in Peru, together with Innovations for Poverty Action, I think they're very clear. They don't want the evaluation to be expensive. They want it to be quick. And they want it to focus on their priorities. And if the researchers want to be involved, that's the conditions of playing in this field. And I think that that's also, those types of structures are also something that can lead us to more effective and efficient use of evaluation. And one last point I'll bring up on the importance of cost. So thinking about the cost of interventions, has changed the way that I think about lots of different types of programs. So one of my roles at JPAL is to look at what we're learning from post-primary education interventions and what types of programs or do we think, what categories of interventions are worth further investment. And one of them, which I really quickly blazed over, was this idea about sharing information about the returns to education. And so if, say, for example, where one study was done in the Dominican Republic targeting middle school students, that in the Dominican Republic, around between 25 and 30% of youth finish secondary school. And one of the things that was interesting is that from surveys that have been done, that many youth underestimate the value of an additional year of education. So going from 7th to 8th grade or 9th to 10th grade. And in fact, so little things like facts that, for example, that in Dominican Republic, people will earn 41% more money if they complete secondary school is something that families and the youth don't have that knowledge. So if you look at the result of just a 45-minute video shown in the school year on increase in continued enrollment, you look at the impact from the rigorous study that was done, I first saw it and it's 0.2 additional years of schooling. Well, I thought, it's not that much to get excited about. I didn't think. But when you look at that as a ratio to cost, that the cost is just showing an additional 45-minute video for the year, yes, this is not a question, this is not an intervention that's going to solve your enrollment problems and change things dramatically. But it is a very cost-effective, simple thing that can be done that you can't appreciate its true impact until you look at it as a ratio to cost. So I think that's just a plug of why it's such an important thing to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Gracias. Tania, para las preguntas de Coneval, yo también quisiera hacer un comentario.
Gracias. Muy interesantes las preguntas porque sin duda siempre nos hacen, o por lo menos a mí todas estas preguntas me hacen regresar un poco al origen a términos de por qué tomamos las decisiones que tomamos y por qué estamos haciendo lo que hacemos desde Coneval, ¿no? Y entonces creo que voy a tratar de englobar las respuestas, pero la primera creo que tiene que ver mucho con la cantidad. Es decir, ¿por qué tantos tipos de evaluación? ¿Por qué tanto número de evaluaciones? ¿Por qué tantos o tan pocos temas que se analizan en una evaluación? Y más bien la respuesta que doy es una pregunta. ¿Qué queremos contestar? ¿Cuál es la pregunta o las preguntas que esa determinada evaluación nos quiere contestar? No hay un número definido. Sin duda, tener un referente del número de evaluaciones es un referente. Pero lo que queremos saber y el uso realmente de la evaluación es qué queremos contestar con esa evaluación. Entonces, al final, me parece que la pregunta hacia donde tendríamos que abrir el foco es ¿qué quieren las evaluaciones específicas de desempeño? Las evaluaciones quieren hacer un desempeño, hacer una valorización, un juicio de valor sobre el desempeño anual, porque está pensado en un ejercicio presupuestal anual, ¿no? De el total de programas sociales. ¿Por qué del total? Porque el legislativo lo ha decidido así en una ley. Entonces, al final lo que hacemos es cumplir con tratar de responder esa pregunta que se hizo el legislativo. Sin duda, y ahí sí, más que hacerme la pregunta a mí, porque seguramente yo voy a estar sesgada, preguntémosles a todos los equipos de evaluadores que han participado en la SED cada año, ¿no? A Guillermo Cejudo, a Ileana Yashine, a cientos y cientos de evaluadores. Y estoy casi segura que si les preguntaran que lo que hacen es un monitoreo en lugar de una evaluación, a lo mejor no estarían de acuerdo, pero no se dejen guiar por mí, preguntémoselos a todos ellos. Más allá de eso, lo que sí creo es que tener una evaluación anual chiquita, grandota, ha logrado hacer una cultura de evaluación, abrirse a que la gente quiera evaluarse. O sea, todos esperamos, y yo cuando llegué a temas de evaluación hace 15 años, el tema era, todos queríamos encontrarnos un progresa o un oportunidades, un equipo abierto a ser evaluado, con grandes registros administrativos, que pudiéramos hacer un análisis muy exhaustivo. Pero en la realidad, desde mi experiencia en México, en el gobierno federal, no ha sido así. Lo que sí ha sido es que tener un ejercicio de evaluación cada año hace que la gente al menos esté más abierta. Al principio, nosotros usábamos realmente la estrategia del Yakult, ¿no? Que es la señora del carrito que va casa por casa vendiendo evaluaciones. Esa era nuestra estrategia. Ahora, cada día más se acercan programas y responsables de programas o subsecretarios y secretarios a pedirnos evaluaciones. ¿Por qué? No porque quieran ser evaluados, sino porque quieren responder una pregunta. Y al final, desde nuestra perspectiva, eso es lo que hacen las evaluaciones. Desde la perspectiva de Coneval, ¿no? Responder preguntas. Y el tema que tú dijiste me parece fundamental. ¿Cómo ligar el sistema de evaluación con el sistema de planeación? Es fundamental, porque sí, y de nuevo, esta perspectiva desde donde yo vengo, me parece que lo que ha logrado la evaluación, y déjame más bien corregirlo, lo que ha logrado el Coneval, el diseño del Coneval, entendido en que tiene dos funciones principales, la evaluación y la medición de pobreza, y que el consejo directivo sean académicos, ha logrado un impulso en el rediseño de política pública, ¿no? Y eso ha afectado de manera, digamos, directa la planeación de acciones. Pero desafortunadamente en el marco institucional no lo tenemos ligado, ¿no? O sea, de hecho tenemos una ley de planeación y ni siquiera tenemos reglamento. Entonces, al final, ligarlo es algo, no hay una armonización entre leyes que nos permita ligarlo. Pero estoy convencida y completamente de acuerdo contigo en el hecho de que es necesario una reforma en el tema de planeación. ¿Listo?
Muchas gracias, Tania. Bueno, creo que estas últimas preguntas me parecen muy bienvenidas y de hecho creo que nos sugiere un tema para la siguiente semana de evaluación del siguiente año, que es cómo diseñar un sistema de evaluación óptimo y útil para mejorar los programas de la mejor manera posible. Creo que es bien importante ser críticos y autocríticos porque al contrario de muchos otros campos, por ejemplo, la medición de la pobreza, uno puede ver de experiencias internacionales y de la literatura cómo se hacen las cosas, cuáles son mejores métodos, etcétera. El tema de evaluar para informar políticas públicas es mucho más complejo y creo que no se ha resuelto, ningún país, ninguna institución lo ha resuelto en forma sistemática. Por ejemplo, hay preguntas muy específicas que pues ya no tenemos tiempo de entrar porque literalmente ya se nos acabó el tiempo de la conferencia, pero creo que son muy interesantes. ¿Por qué tienes múltiples instancias? ¿Por qué tienes? ¿Cuál es el mejor? Nosotros, Coneval diseñó un menú amplio de instrumentos de evaluación con la idea que sean complementarios. Una evaluación de impacto sola, por ejemplo, no te dice casi nada. Una evaluación típica de impacto pues es una caja negra donde ves el resultado y sobre todo si es un programa complejo, pues no sabes por dónde fallaron o por dónde sirvieron las cosas, tampoco sabes si es un excelente resultado o es un pésimo resultado porque tú necesitas costo-efectividad y poderlo comparar con otros programas. Entonces, con una sola evaluación tener todo lo que necesitas ver de un programa, yo no conozco ninguna evaluación en ninguna parte del mundo que haga eso. Por eso la idea de tener múltiples evaluaciones. ¿Cómo combinarlas? ¿Cómo usarlas para el proceso de planificación? ¿Cómo sintetizarlas? Las específicas de desempeño para mí, más que una evaluación, son un esfuerzo de síntesis. Un esfuerzo de síntesis que totalmente comparto con Miriam, es excesivamente simplificado, ¿no? Al final, alguien tiene que irse a los insumos que están detrás de esto para aprender algo más sustantivo sobre el programa, ¿no? Pero bueno, con eso yo terminaría. Creo que tuvimos una excelente sesión, creo que tuvimos 2 excelentes días. No sé si hay un proceso de clausura formal. o informal.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. ¿Me escuchan? Sí, ¿verdad? Muchísimas gracias a todos. Elinor Chelimsky fue la primera directora de evaluación de la GAO en Estados Unidos, de la Oficina de Rendición de Cuentas Gubernamental. Y ella decía que la evaluación es intrínseca a una sociedad democrática. Es intrínseca a una sociedad democrática, primero, porque genera debate. Segundo, porque informa a la política. Y tercero, porque ayuda a rendir cuentas. Me parece que esta generación del debate es fundamental para saber para discutir entre nosotros qué funciona y qué no. Pero esta generación de debate también se incluye a la propia evaluación. La evaluación es un proceso técnico inserto en un proceso político, lo han dicho aquí. Pero no puede ser solamente un proceso técnico y tampoco puede ser una simple simulación política. Alguien dijo que bueno, que el uso de la evaluación se puede medir porque el funcionario, aunque leyó la evaluación, pues aunque no haya hecho nada, pues ya es simple un uso, ¿no? Pero la evaluación debe cambiar comportamientos. Y los evaluadores tenemos una gran responsabilidad de hacer que el ejercicio sistemático de generación de conocimiento rinda frutos para el beneficio de todos. Yo veo la evaluación como una forma rigurosa de generación de conocimiento y en ese sentido es la generación de un bien público. El gobierno y la sociedad civil, por ello, deben estar permanentemente involucrados fomentando la evaluación. Y me parece que esa es precisamente la intención de esta Semana Nacional de la Evaluación. Ha sido un gran gusto, es muy alentador, muy esperanzador ver la reacción de este público, ver la reacción a la semana de tantas actividades. Encontré yo un ambiente inmejorable para la discusión y quiero agradecer a todos ustedes por su presencia, por su interés, por sus preguntas y por el debate que se ha promovido aquí. Agradezco a nuestros cómplices, a la Secretaría de Hacienda, a Coneval, a Mexid, a JPAL. Un profundo agradecimiento a todo el equipo del Centro CLIR, a Claudia Maldonado, a Sergio Vázquez, a Fabiola López, Indrani Barrón, Emil Salim, Oliver Peña, Oscar Ramos, Diana García, Ana Ramírez, que sin su ayuda esto no hubiera sido posible y solamente me resta invitarlos a seguir participando en los eventos de la semana y a seguir fomentando el debate productivo. Muchas gracias. A comer.
Yes, yes.
Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, maestra.
Sí, infelizmente se me creció de los problemas a la oficina.